Welcome back to our farmhouse kitchen. Today I'm going to be taking you through a winter week as I cook from scratch for my family of 10. I'm starting this morning by feeding my sourdough starter so that it will be bubbly and active this afternoon, because I'm going to prep several things to get me ready for an easy week, or at least a doable week of making meals for my family. Since it is Monday, I don't have my sourdough starter ready or any bread or pizza dough already fermented. So I'm going to make something from meat that I already have thawed out and from an ingredient like wild rice. I also don't have any potatoes. We had an ice storm here, and so we can't even leave our house today. And I actually had already planned to make something that would require a few ingredients that we don't have. But I really do love the challenge of taking things that we do have on hand and making something out of it. So I'm starting by getting some bacon fat, otherwise known as lard, into my pot, getting it really hot. I had some moose chops already thawed out from last week. At the beginning of every week, I go out into the freezer that we have in the garage where I keep the cow. I usually buy a whole cow from my sister, a whole hog, several chickens. My dad shot a moose in Canada. I just pull several cuts of different meats, put it in a big dish. I used to always say a 9x13, but lately I've been doing 2 9x13s because if I don't, I run out of thawed meat somewhere around the end of the week. I was determined for that not to happen, so I didn't have to fast thaw some chicken breast or ground meat, and I still had some moose chops left over to save me on this Monday. I don't have the potatoes I want for this stew, but we're making it work with carrots, onions, garlic, and celery. And then I'm going to also do some wild rice, sort of as the carb component, what would be the potato. I'm cooking everything in a little bit of that bacon fat that I had reserved on the stove. My daughter is making graham crackers from scratch with whole grain flour. She wanted to make cheesecake bars today because I had a bunch of cream cheese in the fridge that was on its way toward expiration. So I thought we could use that up before restocking the fridge and the freezer. Again, I love days like this where instead of getting all the things that you would need for a recipe, just making do with the things you have, doing a clean out before stocking things back up. We also don't have a whole lot of milk. Haven't really shared it here, but currently our cow is dry. So we've been getting milk from a local farm once a week, but it is gone. And so we're just making do, and we'll be having a big old restock soon. I add wine and broth to the pot, salt, pepper, and then I'm just gonna simmer it. I'm also going to cook the wild rice separately. Could, if you had a lot of time, cook the wild rice in with the stew, but it would take a while to cook, and also it might overcook the carrots and some of the other parts, like the celery would probably get a little bit mushy. So I'm gonna do that separately and then combine everything, let it simmer. We will very much enjoy this on this ice day. Another thing that we're making do with is we don't have any sour cream, but Johanna needs some for her cheesecake that she's making. So I'm just going to strain off a little bit of kefir, and she can add that in instead of the sour cream that the recipe actually called for. I also had a little bit of gravy from a roast I made last week. I'm just going to throw that in. It'll taste delicious in here. All it is the drippings from a roast plus some flour and salt. It was just made within the last 3 or 4 days. I know it wasn't any more than that, so I know it'll taste really good in here. I made some sourdough pumpernickel bread. It's not the same as the brown bread because it has rye flour like a traditional pumpernickel. You can find the printable version of this recipe over on farmhouseonboone.com. Just a few slices left of that, so I'll toast and butter what we have and serve that alongside our moose stew. This afternoon, I'm going to do my major sourdough prep time. Not everything you make in your kitchen needs to be sourdough, of course, and not everything even needs a bread component. You don't have to have buns or toasted bread or tortillas, but it does make for some pretty easy options whenever those things are available. So whenever I get the chance to do something like this, it makes for an easier week. The great thing about sourdough baking and cooking is you can get doughs going, allow them to do their bulk ferment, and then stash them in the fridge until you're ready to use them, which is what I'm going to be doing a lot today. On the menu are sourdough tortillas, sourdough bread, just the regular stretch and fold bread. I'm going to do a little bit of a variety here though with some whole grain, hamburger buns, as well as pizza crust. So that way throughout this week, I know exactly where I can pull to start making something and already be through the first phase of this process, so it'll be a lot quicker. I have a bunch of bulk grains I recently restocked, and so today I am milling some kamut and hard white wheat. I'm doing a little bit extra so that way I have some on hand to quickly pull from for more baking either this week or next. I try to mill freshly, but it's also really nice to have some quick jars of flour to pull from. For these boules today, I am doing half freshly milled and half bread flour, just like an all-purpose bread flour. I get asked a lot how to make whole grain breads lighter and denser and fluffier. And the truth is that whenever you're doing 100% whole grains, it's hard to get that result. You can get something that is beautiful and delicious and hearty, but of course it is just a slightly different product. Today, I'm kind of getting the best of both worlds because what I'm making here is going to have a very large amount of whole grains, well, roughly half. And it's also going to be light and fluffy because it does have half all-purpose. So if that is a nice compromise for you and your situation, that you feel like you want to have light and fluffy, delicious bread, but also to have a lot of whole grains, I think this is a really good option. So I did 950 grams total of flour. I did 475 of a mixture of the kamut and the hard white wheat, about equal parts. I just poured it until the two of them reached 475. And then did the rest of the way, so another 475 with the all-purpose bread flour. I'm getting this tortilla dough soaking and fermenting, and I'm going to move on to pizza dough. Again, sourdough tortilla dough and sourdough pizza dough, both over on the Farmhouse on Boone blog, farmhouseonboone.com. All of these recipes are actually anything sourdough you could ever want is over there. I also recently released a sourdough course. I don't think I've ever even mentioned that on here. And the course comes with a printable version of all of my sourdough recipes. You can get them all in one place. So if you want to check out my sourdough course, if you're brand new and you're thinking, how the heck do you do this? It's actually really simple. The course is called Simple Sourdough. You can find that by Googling Simple Sourdough Course Farmhouse on Boone. It's also linked in my Instagram profile. It's been really fun since releasing the course because there's a private Facebook group and all of the people who purchase the course go in there and people share their wins, their pictures, they share their questions. It's a great place to be. Okay, now I'm making some buns, and just like with the bread, I'm doing a pretty large amount of whole grain flour. For this one, I'm doing 2 cups of all-purpose and 1 cup of whole grain. So it's a third whole grain. This is my sourdough hamburger buns recipe, but with a little bit of whole grain added, otherwise the exact same. I'm doing my first round of stretch and folds on the bread recipe that I did half whole grain. Now at first it doesn't stretch very well because of all of that bran that is in it because of the whole grain, but it will develop and be beautiful by the end of it. I'm labeling my bowls because I'm making pizza crust, tortillas, and slider buns here. I don't want to get confused because these are going to be sitting in my pantry all night for the fermentation process, and I don't want to get confused on which dough is which. They're really similar doughs, just slight variations, so it can be easy to get confused. But that's also why I like doing it this way. You get the mixer dirty once, you get the starter fed and out once, you get the oil, honey, salt, flour, all out at one time. And then you can just let them sit in a semi-warm place. Honestly, I prefer kind of a cool place. The coolest place in my kitchen is in the pantry until they are beautifully bubbly and fermented. Taking a quick cooking break to tell you about one of my favorite ways to source ingredients for my pantry and for my kitchen for all of this from scratch food is Thrive Market. Thrive Market is a membership-based online grocery store where you can source natural and organic ingredients. For me, in my little town in Missouri, there are some things that I simply can't get locally, or if I can get them locally, they are very much at a premium price because of the low demand. Things like einkorn flour, certain types of spices. There are snacks that I get for our homeschool co-op lunches that have higher quality ingredients. I get collagen protein on there, supplements, and even very basic pantry staples like canned tomatoes, pasta sauce, tomato paste that are all organic and meet my standards. I love that on the Thrive Market website, you can shop by your dietary preference. So if you are paleo, dairy-free, gluten-free, you can make it to where you only see those options and it becomes a very streamlined shopping experience. Plus orders over $49 ship free straight to your house, so it makes it so easy to get the things that you need and love in your kitchen. Thrive Market also has a deals section that I like to go through every time I'm on there just to see if there's anything that I normally buy or something I want to try that is on there for a very good price. They also have a price match guarantee, so if you find something cheaper at your local store, you can bring that back to Thrive Market and get it for that price. Thrive Market is offering Farmhouse on Boone viewers 30% off your first purchase plus a free gift worth up to $60 by using my link, thrivemarket.com/Farmhouse on Boone. It'll also be linked in the description box below. Since I want to really develop the gluten on my half whole grain boule recipe here, I'm just going to keep popping into the pantry every half hour or hour to do a round of stretch and folds. This is optional. It will turn out fine even with just 3 stretch and folds total, but I want to really get a good end result here. Johanna finished up her cheesecake with a bit of a chocolate topping and strawberries, and now it's the next day. So I'm going to show you how I deal with all of this stuff. I'm not going to make it all in one day, but I do have to do something with all of it because it has been fermenting, some of it for about 18 hours, and then some of it even gonna let ferment a little bit longer. So I'm dividing my bun dough, which was the 1/3 whole grain freshly milled flour, into, I believe I did 16 parts. Can we count them there? Something like that. I wasn't paying total attention. I just knew that I wanted them a lot smaller than my usual buns. So in the original bun recipe over on the blog, it makes 8. I wanted them about half the size because I'm doing pulled pork sliders. We still haven't made it to the store. The ice has melted, but I'm still just going to be working with what I have today because it's not completely dire. I have things I can still make from what I have. You can see that this bread dough here, that was half whole grain. This is what's going to turn into my 2 sourdough boules. Really fermented very beautifully. It got tall and bubbly, still very workable. What you don't want to see is a big soupy mess. If that happens, it means that you over fermented. I did a little pre-shape and I'm going to put one in the bowl and back into the pantry. The reason for that is I want to add cranberry and walnuts and I still haven't been to the store and I'm hoping to get groceries later today so I can still do that. Checking on my tortilla and pizza dough, they both look very bubbly and beautiful. I'm just going to pop those into the fridge until later this week whenever I'm ready to make pizza and tortillas. We're not going to do anything with those today. Since I divided the bread dough in half and put half in the pantry to add my cranberries and walnuts to, I'm going to make the other half just into a regular plain loaf of bread. I don't have any big plans for this, but we always like to have bread laying around, whether it's for a quick sandwich, for a snack, or if kids want to take it if we have sports or something, or just toast with eggs in the morning. We never can have enough bread laying around. There doesn't need to be a plan for it. I'm going to put it in this plastic bag and just set it on the stove. It's not going to get a fridge rise. It's just going to rise at room temperature. Actually, I didn't end up setting it on the stove because my buns were rising there. Anytime I'm trying to rise something really fast, I put it in that spot because it's warm because of the pilot lights. So that's my fast rising place, which is really nice to have because sometimes I want to bake something within an hour or two, like these slider buns for lunch. So I'm getting my pulled pork going by taking a pork shoulder roast, sauteing it until it's brown, adding onions and broth, and then pressure cooking it for an hour. I'm going to get myself a glass of bubbly water kefir before moving on to the next thing, which is a side dish for the pork sliders. I was going to say about the bread, you don't always have to do a fridge rise. You can make it rise really fast in a warm spot or at a room temperature spot, which is where I have mine now, maybe 2 or 3 hours. There's so much play with sourdough based on where you put it, and you can really manipulate the timing to work for you based on any and all of those factors. That's what's so fun about sourdough is once you get really familiar with it, you can make it work for your kitchen no matter what. There was this really funny reel going around, and I try to stay off Instagram, honestly. I try to leave the app off my phone most of the time because there are certain things that just, why do they take up space in my brain? But there was this reel where this account that makes jokes, like it was definitely supposed to be a joke, it wasn't supposed to be serious, talked about how she no longer has time for her family because she's doing sourdough. And I know she was joking, but the comments really weren't joking and made me realize that people really do think that sourdough is something that is so hard, so time consuming. No mom would have any time to do it. And I just want to encourage you that if you feel like you want to do it, if you don't, that's totally fine. But if you feel like you want to do it, but you feel like there's just like you couldn't even have a relationship with your kids anymore if you're doing sourdough, I'm here to tell you that you can make it work for you. It can fit around your schedule. You can pause it in the fridge. You can make it rise really fast and bake it that day, or you can put it in the fridge and bake it 4 days from now. It does not have to be this perfectly timed out, rigid thing. Here's the deal. We all have to cook if we are going to survive. This goes for everybody. I was going to say if you're a mom and you're a homemaker, that's not true. Everybody has to cook. And sourdough doesn't make that harder or more cumbersome. It just gives you more options. I tossed my butternut squash with some honey and butter and smoked salt that I just got from Redmond. That was so good. Now look how beautiful this half fresh milled flour and half all-purpose flour loaf turned out. The 1/3 whole grain slider buns also were really good, and it gave them more flavor than usual. I also have some sauerkraut to put on the side. That'll give a nice crisp, fresh component to this meal. I always find it amazing that when I put off grocery shopping, just how many things there are here still to make from my well-stocked freezer and pantry. The dog always waits patiently whenever I'm cutting meat. He thinks I'm going to throw him something. Probably because I sometimes do. More of that smoked, I believe it's an apple smoked salt, tastes great on this meat. I'm going to build my sliders with pulled pork, excuse you, Victor, Date Lady barbecue sauce. So that's a naturally sweetened barbecue, some cheddar cheese. Serve it with sauerkraut and my honey butter butternut squash. A simple but delicious meal. Finally did get a few groceries so I can finish off my cranberry walnut loaf this afternoon. Now this loaf has a lot of variables. We already saw that the half freshly milled grain turned out beautifully in the other loaf, but then I fermented this one even longer, quite a bit longer. So we're sitting at about 24 hours now at room temperature. Because it's a spot that sits around probably 67, 68 degrees, it didn't get over fermented, so that's good. But normally when I do add-ins with sourdough, I add them around the second to last stretch and fold, not after the bulk ferment. So this is going to make it less than desirable results, but I still did want to add the cranberry and walnuts, and I knew it'd be good regardless. Of course, it's going to be good. It's bread. I toasted the walnuts before adding them just to give them a bit more flavor. And then I'm just going to put it into a flour-lined banneton and put that off until I want to use it. So for this meal, I'm going to do something really basic. We rely heavily here on the simple formula of a meat, some kind of vegetable roasted, and then usually some kind of carb, whether that be potatoes or bread. If it's summertime or fall, we'll use in-season things. We end up doing a ton of carrots this time of year and sweet potatoes and butternut squash, anything root vegetable like, lots of onions, lots of garlic. One way I've been making carrots lately is by tossing them with some maple balsamic, olive oil, and maple syrup. Sorry, I had to think about that one for a second. Also, I'll do that exact same formula for Brussels sprouts, and that's really good as well. Just that maple balsamic flavored vegetable roasted in the oven is quite delicious. I'm gonna bake up my cranberry walnut loaf, and then on a large sheet pan, do 2 chickens. I've been doing 2 every time lately because that's enough for our family, but will also give us a bit of leftovers, which is always good. Then I have this Kick It Up chicken seasoning from Thrive Market, and I'll put the balsamic glazed carrots right along with the chicken straight into the oven. And that'll make for a simple meal of roasted chicken, roasted root vegetables, and some toasted bread. Also good to serve this with sauerkraut for a fresh component and of course a gut healthy boost. Now it is time to pull my tortilla dough out of the refrigerator. After the bulk ferment where it doubled in size, I let it sit in the refrigerator for a few days. How many days now? 2 or 3? I don't know. I'm going to roll it out and make it into tortillas for chicken and pork enchiladas. I'm going to use my leftover chicken and pork from previous days this week. Again, I'm using bacon fat to fry them. The key with tortillas is to roll them out until they are paper thin. If you don't, you'll still have a delicious product. It just won't be very pliable. It'll be more like a flatbread. Sometimes this can be a little bit tricky because the gluten is really tight, and whenever you roll them out, they spring back down to the original size. My tip with that is to roll several out, let the gluten relax a bit, and then continue rolling them out. If you break it up a little bit like that, it makes it easier. I also like to stretch them on my hands a bit to get them very paper thin. I'm making a homemade enchilada sauce by adding a little bit of olive oil to my pot here, a couple tablespoons each of chili powder and flour, a little garlic powder and cumin, and then I'm taking homemade bone broth, which I got going on the stove whenever I made my whole chickens. It's just been simmering for a while now. And whisk that together with the flour to thicken it a bit, add a little bit of tomato paste, and that makes for a really delicious homemade enchilada sauce. I pulled my chicken and pork straight from the refrigerator, so it's kind of hard because it has the fat still around it, but that's okay. That will totally work whenever it goes into the oven. I'm going to toss it with my homemade enchilada sauce, put it into my tortillas with some cheese, roll it up, top it with more cheese and enchilada sauce, bake it, and then add the good stuff, all the toppings of cilantro, avocado, lime juice, sour cream, salsa. This one is a real crowd pleaser. Remember earlier this week whenever I prepped pizza crust? Well, this dough has been sitting in the fridge for several days, and tonight is pizza night. So I'm going to divide the dough in 4 and then bake it on some preheated, either a pizza stone or a cast iron skillet. I do a little bit of each. I make 3 pizzas with just red sauce, marinara sauce, mozzarella cheese, and ground sausage. And then for Luke and I, we always like to have a figgy piggy or some kind of thing like that, where it's sweet with some pork, something spicy. So for tonight, I am spreading on fig jam, mozzarella cheese. I always add goat cheese to this type of pizza. And then I will add some jalapenos for spice and top it ultimately with bacon. We also will drizzle it with Date Lady chili sauce, adds to the spiciness and the sweet. This is my favorite way to have pizza. The kids don't like it because it's spicy and kids are a little funny about goat cheese. We really enjoy a good pizza night, and I love that you can prep sourdough pizza dough far in advance, probably up to a week, maybe more, definitely more, but let's just say a week to be official about it. Again, get the recipe for the dough over on farmhousehumboon.com, and thank you so much for stopping by our farmhouse kitchen and seeing a peek into what we are cooking this winter week for our family of 10.